Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. As time goes on and as the consequences of the Season of the Witch set in, it's clear that we're going to see a showdown between the Cabal of Kytel's Ascendancy and the Hive of Xivu Arath, and that battleground is going to be the Cabal homeworld of Torobatl. In the middle of that conflict, there are many crossing plot lines, and today I wanted to pick one of those out, one that I think might be one of the most interesting of all of them: Teox. This video is going to dive into a variety of strange details about the story and lore from the Cabal and the story and lore from the Hive, and it's also you can get a little bit of perspective, but at the end, I hope you'll understand why I say that the questions behind Teox are so important. It might not even be a factor in this conflict, but if there's even a whisper of Teox, there's a chance that she could be a defining factor of the entire war. I think it's also worth remembering, just as a little side note, that everything I'm about to talk about is not truly confirmed. Lots of it is speculative and lots of it relies on rather wild theory. So take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt. This is not at all confirmed. But first, a word from our sponsors at StarForge. If you want a great new gaming PC, StarForge has something for everyone. Whether you're trying to make a PC on a budget or trying to go all out for a gaming rig with all the bells and whistles, they have you covered. Use my link in the description below, and thanks again to StarForge for sponsoring this video. Anyway, back to the lore. So, I guess we should really start with the basics. Who is Teox? Teox is originally mentioned in the Books of Sorrow, the oldest Hive historical records that we have access to, and in those records, she's somewhat of a mythical figure. Teox was originally the sterile mother of the Osmium Court, who was at the side of the old Osmium King, the father of the beings that would one day become Oryx, Savathun, and Xivu Arath. The implication, then, is that she was a Krill, but as a mother morph Krill, she was one of the individuals within the species who had a lifespan longer than the handful of years that a typical Krill might live. It's noteworthy that at 10 years old, the Osmium King was considered ancient and senile, and that after 5 years, most of the individuals of the species would be considered somewhat aged. The fact that Teox can live longer than a typical Krill might matter because she's a figure that's been chased by the Osmium dynasty for all their existence. The reason for that is pretty warranted in the eyes of the original 3 Hive gods. Long ago, she sent word to a rival faction of Krill that the Osmium King was weak and that he should be killed for the betterment of all those under his rule. This rival faction, known as the Helium Drinkers, agreed to the bargain that Teox put forward, and forced the younger versions of Oryx, Savathun, and Xivu Arath to flee the Osmium Court, as well as killing their father and allowing Teox to claim dominion for herself, all under the satellite rule of the Helium Drinkers. So this was a very good reason for them to be rather hateful and pursue Teox, but the reality is that this is also kind of the inciting incident for the entire history of the Hive. It led to the creation of the 3 Hive gods that we fought in the Light and Dark saga. It was part of the sequence of events that led to the Hive accepting the Worm God's larvae, and it would change the Krill from a weaker species that saw themselves predominantly as prey to a terrifying interstellar swarm that would do battle in the name of the sword logic. Teox would eventually be forced to retreat, first from the Osmium Court, then from Fundament generally, then from the occupied moons above Fundament, and then from the domains of the Ecumene. The sibling Hive gods would conquer all that she touched, and even to this day, on the back end, they are kind of still searching for her. For the longest time, the name Teox was whispered amongst the lore professionals of the community in kind of a conspiratorial fashion. It'd be a really common joke to say maybe X is Teox, no, Y is Teox, clearly. This is something that really added to her mythic status in Destiny's lore, and she's not really been mentioned in any concrete senses since the Books of Sorrow. Or at least, that was the case until recently. Let's change tack for a bit and switch to talking about the Cabal side of things. In particular, let's talk about Scions. When the Scions were first conquered by the Cabal, they universally joined the ranks of the Cabal as a client race. This is possibly the most polite way of saying that they were slaves, but it's nonetheless true. This is how the Cabal would see most civilizations that they conquered and forced under their yoke. Be they the Karga Clips, be they the Sindhu, be they the Scion, be they the Arkborn, it doesn't matter who they are, all of them would eventually bend the knee to the Cabal Empire, and they would effectively be slaves, second-class citizens. However, there were some Scions who in their own time were able to resist the Cabal Empire. These Scions were led by a great rebel of genius intellect named Otzot, and she led them towards a grand purpose. They called themselves the Freeborn Scions, and in their rebellion against the Cabal Empire, they worked to recreate one of the signature marvels of their people, the Oxa machine. The original machine, as we'll discuss in a moment, was destroyed. The recreated machine was something that Callus kept around, as best we know, and as best we can be sure. It might be at worst lost, and at best still in the possession of the Cabal somehow. The Oxa machine is our real focus here, and I'll cut to the chase and throw us straight into theory. The collector's edition of Lightfall included the Cabal booklet that gives us a little bit more context on Keitel, and one of its passages gives us more context on the Oxa machine, and it gave rise to a really important idea. The idea and theory that the Oxa machine and Teox might be the same or very closely related. This was a theory that was first covered by Myelin Games and his community, to the best of my knowledge. They were poring over the new lawbooks on his stream, and someone came with the suggestion. At that moment in time, Myelin went ahead and did a deeper investigation. That video, if you can still find it on his channel, is actually still worth a watch. Go ahead and check if you can. But the strange thing is that there are remarkable numbers of similarities between Teox and the Oxa machine. So before we really jump into all of that, we need to give you the context of that reading from Keitel's Cabal booklet from Lightfall. Let's read that entry and give you the idea of what's really going on and what prompted all of this. For context, all of these entries in this lore book, the physical book that you get with the collector's edition of Lightfall, are from Keitel's perspective, and it highlights a moment in the particular passage we're looking at when she was 35 years old. At the time, her father was hosting a lavish celebration for her in, well, reverence of the fact that she had returned from military duty, and, it's not really about Keitel. Callus hates the idea that she's a part of the military. He hates that she shuns the things that he loves. And so, realistically, this is all a lot of tense family politics and drama. In this particular reading, Keitel finds herself at a lavish dinner party, and she ends up talking with Umuna Rath. For those of you who don't know, Umuna Rath is the Evocate General of the Cabal Empire, basically the highest ranked Cabal military officer, the primus of all legions. Umuna Rath is also Keitel's close friend and mentor. The conversation that they have is all around the origin of their names, but it brings up the Oxa machine directly. Take a listen. "Your name is a prayer for war," the Evocate General says. I snap to attention. She laughs at me and offers a small harpoon of canapes and a cocktail with a middling-sized shrub. I decline, and she tusks. "You should enjoy yourself. It's your party." Although we both know it is his party. "My father named me for a star," I say. "Nothing to do with war." "Yes, but the star Keitel was named for a myth. Not an old homeworld myth either, a myth from the Age of Sails, when we conquered the stars. Surely you know it, assuming that you've been briefed on the Oxa. The Odile Zenithaf Anarchive, sometimes Oxta, depending on how you construct the acronym. The alien oracle that led us to the graves of Ark? Must be wary now. Oxa is a Scion myth, and the Scions are a sensitive topic. My father wants to free them from bondage. It claimed to record the story of the galaxy, and to prophesize what may yet come. A black box for galactic civilizations, if you prefer it in pilot's terms. The Evocate General nods to the pin on my right pauldron. I'm conscious of my shaved-down tusks, of the sores left by the fighter's interface. The doomed and the damned left the record of their downfall in the Oxa. Your star got its name from the oldest myth in that archive. And when your mother told your father that story, the star became your name. a prayer that all will go as it must, and the way it must go is struggle. Ayat. Not a word in Ulurant or any other Cabal tongue. But Keitel means something else. Yes, it may not always go as it needs to go. A good name for a soldier. A strange name for a daughter, I say. Your father chose it for your mother's sake. Out of love. I remain at attention. I do not look at her. So, she's dead. The Advocate General looks sharply at me. I can tell by the motion of her cocktail shrub in the edge of my vision. He never told you? No. Well, she sounds genuinely shocked. Then it's not my place. Advocate General? A junior pilot should not address her senior officer so directly, but we are in the palace and I am the Princess Imperial. What does your name mean? She grins. Her tusks are huge. My parents were soldiers. Soldiers know mythology too. So there's a lot to unpack, but I think the first thing to really pick up on, which is the thing that gives this idea, this theory that Teox and the Oxa machine are somewhat related or are similar, is the fact that the abbreviation of Oxa is itself one of two abbreviations. It is sometimes referred to as Oxter, because the X stands for Xenotaph, and the T from Taf is sometimes added to the abbreviation, meaning sometimes it is Oxa and sometimes it is Oxter. Here's the thing, Oxter is an anagram of Teox. Now, an anagram alone doesn't make compelling theory, but let's think about some of the things that we learn from this passage and some other bits of lore. We know, thanks to Keitel's name being based on the Hive word Ayat, that there is an implication that Ayat comes from some of the oldest mythology that the Oxa machine has recorded, meaning that the oldest records in the Oxa are those of the Hive. Teox was a Krill, and therefore she would have been alive at the time when the Hive were born, when she herself might have been fleeing from Fundament, as Aurix, Savathun, and Xivu-Arath declared the new Hive out of the old dead Krill. It therefore makes sense that these would have been some of the oldest myths in the Oxa machine if the Oxa machine was somehow based on or similar to Teox. But this is just a fine starting point, and the similarities don't stop there. Otherwise, I wouldn't be writing this video. The Oxa machine was a black box of civilizations according to Amun-Arath. It was a place within which civilizations were able to leave their final records as they were destroyed. The question then, of course, becomes destroyed by what? And the Hive make for a compelling answer, not to mention the fact that they were an arm of the Witness's dominion and domination over the known universe. The Hive themselves would certainly have committed the destruction of thousands of civilizations. At first glance, it doesn't seem like much, but again, it seems as though there is a lot to it there. And there is something more to it. Teox herself was witness to the complete destruction of many civilizations by the Hive. On Fundament, she saw the fall of Kahana-Tol, the great bastion of civilization at the world's heart. Cosmopolitan as it was, it fell to some of the earliest armies of the Hive. On the moons above Fundament, she saw the defeat of the Ammonite, and the slaughter of their Leviathan and Chroma Admiral. And when she finally made her way to Ecumene space, the last of her appearances in the Books of Sorrow, she was able to share the strategies of the Hive with them, as well as the stories of the worlds that they had burned in their conquests. This allowed the Ecumene to mount a sizable resistance to the Hive, but ultimately it still wasn't enough, and Teox was never found. Probably it was the case that she was able to flee, with the knowledge that Oryx had taken on the mantle of the Taken King, and was now firmly on the road to crushing the Ecumene despite their valiant resistance. If there was ever a character that would potentially count as a black box for various dead civilizations, then it would definitely be Teox. Rulk, the Hive, Nezarec, the Witness, and many of the other ancient figures or groups in the universe that might have been around for the destruction of those ancient civilizations have no reason to record them. The Witness is indifferent to anything that does not bring it closer to the final shape. Nezarec doesn't care for record keeping, only for pain and suffering. The Hive do not keep records of their ancient destroyed civilizations, save for those records found in either the World's Grave or the Books of Sorrow, and they have sparse mentions of many of the other hundreds of civilizations they've killed. And Rulk doesn't care about any civilization but for his own and the civilization that might one day rise in service of the Witness should the final shape come to be. But Teox's agenda of stopping the Hive means that she might well have recorded those that were conquered and destroyed by them. Now, the lore doesn't stop there either, because there is some nuance to be had, and this is where we need to focus on the Oxa machine a little bit more. And in particular, there is this note. There are two versions of the Oxa machine, as I stated before. There is the original version of the Oxa machine that was destroyed by the Cabal Empire long ago. But the Oxa machine was also supposedly reconstructed by Otzot, the freeborn scion, before she and her ilk were folded back into Callus's empire. It's not clear which Oxa is being referred to by any character whenever it's mentioned, but regardless, if it was reconstructed, there is a chance that the original components may have been used. If one of those components was in some way linked to Teox, maybe a part of her remains, or maybe some kind of matrix involving her personality, memories, and mind, then maybe it's possible that the reconstruction of it doesn't matter as much. It's worth mentioning though, because even discussing this means we have to draw a lot of assumptions, and it's a bit of auxiliary knowledge that is important to know when discussing this topic on whole, because you know what? It might deconstruct the entire theory right there. Back to the point of the theory though, if we are to look for more potential hints that Teox and the Oxa machine, be it old or new, are the same, it'd be good to take a moment to look at points at which other characters in Destiny's lore refer to the Oxa machine almost as though it's a person. Luckily, there is evidence of just this, in particular from the Season of Dawn. For those of you who didn't play the Season of Dawn, it revolves around Osiris, Saint 14, an invention of Osiris is called the Sundial, and 3 Scion Flayers. Those 3 Scion Flayers originally discover the Sundial, which is a device of Osiris's creation that allows one to step into the corridors of time, allowing one to move backwards and forwards in time. And in this instance, it is discovered by the 3 Scions at the very beginning of the season. One of the Scions, called Nerul, claims that the device is unfettered and precise and allows one to see the future with perfect clarity. Tazarok, another one of the 3 Flayers that's brought to light in the story, claims that it is not the troubled ramblings of a mad thing like the Oxa. That's a direct quote, by the way. This line alone seems to sell the idea that the Oxa has a personality, one defined by ramblings and madness, but also implies further that there is something more to it that is less machine. Perhaps it is more prophet than machine. Book. When they discuss the Oxa, it is referred to as a machine that not only works as a black box for dead civilization, but also one that creates prophecy of what the future might be. Something of prophecy is neither factual nor precise, but it is a potential window into the future. And this in itself implies that there is more of a personality to the Oxa machine, because for something to give prophecy, one implies that the one or the thing giving it is a prophet or an oracle. So, yeah, there's some kind of personality ascribed to it there. Now, is all of this pretty tenuous? Absolutely, and I think that's worth pointing out because, again, one can poke a lot of holes in these theories, and it's healthy to do so because it keeps us in that place where we're not falling into mad rabbit holes of nothing but skepticism. However, I am going to go ahead and entertain this theory here, even as many holes as can be poked in it, and there is a reason for it. There are an uncanny set of similarities between the Oxa machine and Teox, and I think it leads to a really interesting place if it gets involved in the story that I mentioned at the very top of the video, the story of the battle for Torobatl that will inevitably be conducted between Keitel and Zivur Arath. Regardless of how it all comes to a head in the future, if it turns out that the Oxa machine and Teox are linked, we have a huge subplot within the entire conflict that could open up. So, let's talk about the potential for that subplot, because it brings in a whole load of other elements. Even if we don't look at the main Hive and Cabal elements of it, the Oxa machine is involved with a ton of different things in the lore, including potential Vex links given the Insight Terminus strike, and Maya Sundaresh from the same source. And we also find the recovered artifact, or data artifact of the Oxa from that same strike. Heavily corrupted and not complete as best I can understand, but, you know, there are more threads to be pulled from in that regard. And if we're going to look at Teox's side of things, there are ancient civilizations that we might be looking into, and various dead worlds that we might need to explore in order to discover more. Regardless, if it all comes to a head in the future, and it turns out the Oxa machine and Teox are linked, we have to think about how it's going to play out in that conflict, so let's start there. As I see it, there are several clear sides in that conflict, and as I stated earlier, the two clearest ones are the Hive and the Cabal, Keitel's Ascendancy versus Xivu Arath's Swarm. From there, we have a series of other factions to consider. Us as Guardians would, needless to say, be joining the forces of Keitel if we were there in the first place, but we'd also have to consider another group which is kind of caught between the two main forces, and that's the Scions themselves. The Scion rebels are not all universally aligned with Keitel. Some Scions will still be in her ranks and have perhaps embraced her promise of a better future. Remember that the first thing that Keitel did when she became Empress was to give Scions their freedom, so she has a lot of good reasons to keep them around, and there are some reasonably good reasons for the Scions to actually serve her loyally. There are moments, however, where the Scions have looked to abandon her cause, and in particular, it's worth thinking about what happened in the Season of the Risen and the Vox Obscura mission. They were promised a perfect future by Callus under the Witness, and if we're victorious against the Witness, they'll have some pretty good reasons to hate Keitel, given that their future might have just all been a lie, and, well, they may not have necessarily known that, so they still might believe that we have robbed them of that perfect future. I doubt they'd be willing to hear the truth about that either, given that we continually worked against them in the Season of the Risen, and we killed Callus. Not to mention, we killed the Witness itself, or at least I presume we will have by this point. Who knows? Either way, it means that there's a chance that they won't actually ally with Keitel, but instead might consider themselves to be allies of Xivu Arath. If that is the case, and that is a big if, there are a lot of things that will happen. Now again, I want to dig into that if, because the Scions allying themselves with the Hive Swarm is a generous idea at best. Xivu Arath is not known to be a really productive ally, and in particular she's known for turning supplicants from other factions into her Wrathborn, and the Scions really might not be an exception to this, but if they had a strong enough bargaining chip, they might be able to forge such an alliance. I think the predictive powers of the Oxa machine might be just that. If you take a look at the thing that it could be used for, its predictive engine power could be used as a means of allowing Xivu Arath to more accurately plan and oppose her enemies in battle, giving her an unwavering amount of power so that she might be able to play out and wargame every scenario to its maximum. This would allow her victory over the Cabal forces perhaps, and it might be the indication as to why the Scions would be given some kind of free rein in allying with her. There is, however, a dynamic when all this comes in though, which is simply this. If the Oxa machine is the Scion bargaining chip, we need to ask if Xivu is aware of the potential for Oxa and Teox to be linked. If Xivu is unaware, she would probably be willing to take up such a bargain, given that, you know, it gives her an incredible amount of military probability for success. You then have to sit there and think of the two major questions. Do the Scions themselves know about Teox potentially being the same as the Oxa, or being linked? And does the Oxa have a will of its own? Is Teox still in there? If the answer to either of those questions is yes, I imagine a situation coming about where the Oxa potentially falls into Guardian hands, and where the true nature of it is revealed. This would be to the doom of Xivu Arath, of course, who would potentially find out, thanks to all of this, that the Oxa is indeed something that contains Teox. The dynamic of this in the actual events of such a conflict would be dramatic. It would mean that Xivu would not only be robbed of her tactical advantages, but would immediately put her new allies to the sword, something that would be a problem for any number of reasons that are pretty obvious. Betrayal within her own ranks would significantly weaken Xivu, but it would give Keitel a chance to petition the Scions for peace, and perhaps for a better union. And when it comes down to it, being murdered by a Hive God of War, or becoming an ally to Keitel, who has previously freed the Scion people, given that she might be able to convince them of the truth of what the Witness was going to do at a certain point, well, there's a decent chance that the Scions then take that moment and accept that offer, and understand that Keitel, as she has proven herself to be, is in fact an honorable and loyal ally. So, no matter what happens, one has to sit there and understand that the dynamics really are a three-way cut. Hive under Xivu Arath, Cabal under Keitel, and the Scions under, well, I don't know. The Scions have many notable leaders, and I think they're the real final spoke of this story. There are a few who could come into play here, and I think the two most viable of all are Amtek and Euryx. For those of you who don't know, Amtek was the last of the 4 Scion Flayer sisters that were mentioned within the Season of Dawn, and she actually survived her 3 older sisters. She survived to the point where she conducted a plan to drop the Almighty on the last city. And Euryx, who allied with Callus's Shadow Legion, was one of the Scions who worked as a separatist, trying to draw Keitel's own Scion forces to the side of the Witness via psionic propaganda. Both of them have good reasons to hate Keitel, both of them have good reasons to be a strong story character, and frankly, they are the only Scions, as best I can remember, that exist within the story. There is a really complex narrative that could be told here, and I think that it puts some of the most interesting story elements from both the Hive and the Cabal at the heart of a story which is going to be inevitable. After the final shape comes along, I think we are simply counting the days until Keitel gathers her forces and marches on Torobatl. With that being said, I think the mythical Oxa machine, if it does come up, is going to be a key story factor that all of us will need to be aware of. And if it does indeed come up, there is a chance that Teox is involved. If both those two cool narrative threads collide, we're in for a really interesting story. But again, this is all very much theory, and it is speculative, and not much of it is confirmed. So let me know what you think down below. I know there are a lot of people who have questions as to whether Teox and the Oxa machine are actually the same. I know the advanced enemy version of Savathun's song had a osmium traitor enemy, who some people believe might be Teox, given that she is also a Hive wizard. Interesting theory, but not necessarily proven, and a bit vague when it comes to the actual description. Osmium traitor could define any number of people, though Teox would most certainly fit the bill. Then one has to consider the other potential ideas as to where Teox might be, still out somewhere in the universe, never found by the Hive, biding her time. And then of course, there is the simple Occam's razor answer of, well, the Oxa machine might just not be Teox. If that's so, maybe the story doesn't unfold this way. I'm interested to hear what you think though. Let me know down below in the comments section. What do you think is going to happen? Do you reckon that there's going to be some big story here? Do you think that Teox is the Oxa? I don't know. Maybe you have your own thoughts. Either way, thank you for watching the video. If you did enjoy it, go ahead and leave a like. And of course, if you want more Destiny content, go ahead and hit subscribe, and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Horodasya Arastra. I'll see you, Starside.